Okay, perfect. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Why T&E Change Management is Easier and More Beneficial Than You Think. I'm super excited to be joined by Joe and Meegan, who will introduce themselves shortly. Just some quick housekeeping items. We're going to actually record today's session, and it will be available for on-demand viewing shortly after the session concludes. And of course, if you have any questions as we go, please just pop them in the chat and we'll try and make sure that we have some time at the end to cover those. So we're going to start with a quick poll here. So what's your biggest concern about switching your T&E platform? So hopefully everyone can see that on the screen now. If you could just take a quick moment to actually answer that. And it will just help us inform like what people's challenges are at the moment when we go forward with this webinar. So great, I can see some responses coming in already, which is great. We'll just give it another 5 or 10 seconds for everyone to complete that. And then we'll do a quick summary before we actually jump to intros. Great, we still have a few coming in. So I think we're there right now. So a couple of key areas here, but number one seems to be cost and resource requirements. I think that tends to be very aligned with what we hear. And then obviously time it takes to implement and getting stakeholder buy-in. So some of the three key areas that we can look to focus on today. So my name is Ben Custance, and I lead the solutions architecture team here at Navan. My role is really to scope the technical and operational requirements for enterprise customers who are actually looking to make a change to their T&E program. These can include key areas such as resource requirements, maybe finance or IT teams, identifying those key user groups, and running through exactly what support they may need to actually make a change. Today, we're going to focus on what it's like to make a change to your T&E program, how to get buy-in from some of those key stakeholders, and what a global rollout exactly looks like. So I'm joined by two fantastic panelists. They could do a much better job at introducing themselves than I can. So Joe, maybe if you wanted to kick off before passing over to Meegan.
Yeah, sure, Ben, thanks. So my name's Joanne Young. I'm one of the co-founders at Opteva. We are an independent consulting firm supporting clients with travel and expense. Today, I'm here to share our experiences in the change management space, but also our experiences with Navan. So looking forward to today's session. Thanks, Ben.
Great, thanks, Jamie. Do you want to do a quick intro?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Meegan Walsh. I'm one of the global category leaders within the Indirect Sourcing group. I'm responsible for global travel and professional services. We're a global company operating in over 50 countries, focused on revolutioning the way the world moves for future generations. I was part of the team that helped lead the evaluation and the rollout of Navan. It was definitely a team effort, and we did not have an internal project manager. So a lot of that coordination and change management did sit with us. From a sourcing perspective, our role is to structure that process. Ultimately, it was a cross-functional decision across the business. Throughout the transition, we really changed the narrative of travel at Wabtec, shifting towards a more modern and user-focused experience. Thanks for having me today.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Meegan. So just before we jump into the session itself, we'll just launch one more quick poll here. So where is your organization in the T&E evaluation journey? So just to get some context about like where you are in that evaluation stage right now. So same as before, just pop your answers on there and we'll just give it for 5-10 seconds for everyone to have a chance to complete. Great. So we still have a few more coming in here. Perfect. So I think that this is giving us a good idea here. So obviously quite a few people in that early research, not yet formally evaluating stage, a few less in actively in an RFP right now, some in building an internal business case, and then very few who are actually recently made a switch. So a good overview here, a few people at different stages of their own evaluation process. So thank you for completing that little poll. So when it comes to actually framing the question for today, these are a couple of key stats from Skiff's State of T&E report for this year. So around 77% of T&E managers are interested in an all-in-one solution, and that's actually up from 66% 2 years ago. So what are the key reasons why maybe they're hesitant to actually make a change? So 48% here say it's cost is the main driver for switching, followed by employee training, and then 38% being too complicated. So let's jump into exactly what this looks like. So why do organizations actually get stuck in the first place? So Meegan, maybe you could kick us off. Like, what is the biggest internal resistance to change that you've experienced?
Well, it's really a few things, right? And some of those users will say, "I'm too busy. I can't learn a new tool." But largely that resistance really comes around, that fear of disruption and not really within the tool of itself. Uh, in our instance, it really came down to we absolutely have to make a change because today is just not working for us. There was long hold times. There was little to no support. It was fragmented across multiple TMCs. So it just really wasn't the solution that we needed to really look at current state and then obviously how we also wanted to grow as an organization.
So really it's around like focusing on that people thing. I know like cost is obviously something that's to bear in mind, but for you, it was really the internal resources and actually driving that change with people within the business that was the most important factor.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. And then Joe, from your perspective, you've seen, many different projects over different TMCs, different sizes of businesses. So,
Yeah.
what are some key themes that you've seen in terms of like resistance to change internally?
Yeah, I think for us, it's the level of effort that some of the clients feel is required in an implementation or change to a new travel management company or new solution. I think people fear sometimes the enormous involvement of an IT department, for example, that would be required, therefore budget upfront of the cost of that involvement of the IT department, for example, and other functional departments within the client. So what I kind of experienced in that is that when you actually look at the scope of an implementation, the involvement from the client can be, I think, a little bit. Clients think too much around that, and I think that actually, if you strip that down, there's not as much involved in the IT side as some may think. Things like data feeds and single sign-on, of course, but maybe some of the actual implementation of the solution is not as complex as some clients might think or be too scared to move forward with.
So it's maybe almost like a perceived cost of change as
I think
opposed
so.
to an actual amount that you can define, and that's what
Yeah,
the risk is, as opposed to actually it's going to cost us X. It's the
yeah.
unknown of what that
I
cost
think
is.
so. And I think the effort, unknown of the effort as well that's involved from the client side. I think, a lot of the responsibility sits with this, the supplier. And if you get help from a third party, of course, as well. But I think it's just stripping that down and looking at exactly what's required from the client side and the effort, the work effort involved in that.
Perfect. And Megan, you mentioned around the people, right? Are there any particular user groups who maybe are a little bit more resistant to change than others in the business?
Sure. So if you think about it, some of those very easily embrace change, but then, folks maybe like your travel arrangers, that's the very focused and very influential group. So making sure that they came along the way, they were actually part of our process so that they could actually go through that evaluation. Same thing with a lot of our heavy road warriors, if you will. But we made sure to include a very diverse cross-functional group from finance, HR, IT, so that we really did get that voice of the customer along with also the voice of the traveler to make sure that we were making that change.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think sometimes the EAs get left to the end and maybe told to use a solution, and they tend to be like the major user group. So you obviously made a very conscious decision to put them front and center of that evaluation process. Did that help in the evaluation process that you ran through?
Absolutely. And not only did we include our travel arrangers, but we also did that from different regions because, of course,
Okay.
how some folks in North America may travel is maybe a little bit different than how they might do it in Europe.
So it's almost that like back to basics. Let's work out who those key stakeholders are and then make sure that the right people are involved in the right conversations.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay. And then Joe, so we've talked a little bit about this. Megan's talked about like involving people, but are there any other ways that you can actually get buy-in from key stakeholders who are going to do this implementation? Like what do you tend to see people need in order to sign off on a new implementation project?
Yeah, I mean, often we would include stakeholders right in the out from the outset to make sure that we've got the business requirements right. So normally you've kind of won the hearts and minds of people as you're going through that initial engagement stage with stakeholders to ensure we've captured business requirements and we're sourcing the right solution for people as long as they're involved in that process, that you've got buy-in from the start, then that also helps the implementation process.
Perfect. And Megan, when you made a switch with your TMC, did you have to present like an internal business case to make a change? Like, what did that look like? Like, do certain teams need certain information? How does that work?
Sure. So that was all part of that cross-functional team that we put together so that we made sure that we were getting those checks and balances and operational buy-in along the way so that there weren't any surprises at the end or, challenges to project timelines. We made sure to have an executive sponsor. And again, those cross-functional groups so that they could really ask those probing questions, especially when we got to that finalist stage, within our IT organization to make sure that all of the systems would interact with one another and where we were also building a lot of innovation. Our former system had a lot of manual processes to it that tended to lag. So we also wanted to make sure that we were putting a lot of automation into the new solution as well.
Okay. Okay, amazing. And then an exec sponsor, right? If finding the right exec sponsor for change can always be challenging. And obviously, you work not just with travel, you work with other areas of the business as
Yeah.
well, right? So how do you identify, someone who's going to be a strong like exec sponsor internally for you?
Sure. So we wanted to think about it from a top down, but then also a bottoms up, and really kind of talked with our C-suite level, talked to them about the initiative. They were already on board that the evaluation needed to take place, and ultimately a few of them actually stepped forward. So then it was really trying to decide amongst themselves, okay, well, we'd love to have all of you, but we can really only have one, and then decided to move forward from there. One of the things that I think is really important along this journey is to make sure that there's a lot of communication, a lot of transparency along the way, and making sure that you're getting that voice from different groups to make sure that you're not leaving anything out.
Perfect. And then Joe, from, Megan's given some like perspective internally, but obviously
Yeah.
externally and a consultancy side of things. I think, very often people are running not just a T&E program. Travel might just be one area of the program.
Yeah.
They might have multiple things to deal with, and this may be not area they're particularly familiar with. So from a third party perspective, like how does it work that relationship between consultant and procurement team or finance team to be able to actually scope this in detail or provide the right information to those key stakeholders?
Yeah, I mean, we work closely with the clients to scope it, but we also work very closely with the TMC and supplier so that we're very clear on roles and responsibilities, and ensure that we've got the requirements. But yeah, we work as a kind of we bridge the gap between the kind of, well, if there is any gap, between the supplier and the client, really just to ensure that there is, a very clear statement of requirements that's going to be
Mhm.
delivered and implemented, and that everybody signs up to that. So the knowledge comes from the TMC, comes from the consultant, and on the client side, they've got the internal requirements, and we bring all of that together in a very clear document that says this is the scope and this is what we're going to deliver. And every time anything's questioned around that, then we bring it back to that agreed single source of requirements so that everyone's working to the same thing. So you've got the client, the internal piece, and then you've got the TMC and the consultant working together on, and the experts bringing that to the implementation.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because, generally when we talk about like terms and contracts and these types of things, it tends to be very focused on
Yeah,
how quickly will you answer the phone. And maybe actually it's a step further, step before that, which is actually what does an implementation look like? Like what
yeah,
resources am I going to be needing? And going back to your earlier point, which was around it's more the unknown cost, which is potentially prohibitive. And if people can actually scope it in detail and get a really good idea about what cost and what resources exactly is going to look like, then it's
yeah.
much easier to make that case for change internally.
Yeah, and we'll never go into the implementation phase of a project until you've scoped it, designed it, and absolutely everybody is clear. All three parties are clear, or all parties are clear on exactly what's going to be delivered, and then you keep revisiting back to that single document that everyone's approved, so that everybody knows what's going to be delivered, and you wouldn't move forward in execution until that's done.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And Meegan, you obviously there's lots of competing projects that can be for IT teams, for HR teams, whoever it is. Like, how do you make sure that you're working on a project that actually gets prioritized? Like, are there any key things that you need to provide internally, or you found that work well, to make sure that people have the right thing they need to choose the project that you're working on for those internal resources?
Sure. So, especially come from the sourcing world, we always say proactive and early engagement with our stakeholders, and that works both ways. So, making sure that that demand request is in, and again, making sure that you're involving all of those right stakeholder teams. For instance, the IT to say, okay, well, I'm sure they also have a lot of projects that they need to be working on for the following year. How do we make sure that we get to the top of that priority list? And then, of course, having that executive sponsor is always helpful too.
Yeah, IT always tends to be the one where they have multiple things going on, and it's very difficult to tie people down to an IT project. Okay, so it's around, the right senior stakeholder in the business, so like an EB who can actually support and go out there and push for change. It's about having the right business case, so scoping all of the individual areas with the right teams and making the case for change. And then Joe, to your point, like building out like a really comprehensive statement of work for all the resources that need, how long you're going to need them for, and all of that forming as part of the business case to go to the business with the case for change.
Yeah, and part of that, a big part of that is design, is
Yeah.
designing exactly what the solution will deliver. And
Yeah.
as long as everyone's clear on what that is and the resources are allocated to that, then you can move forward with execution of the implementation plan.
Okay. Great. And then maybe moving forward a little bit to, we've kind of had a look at, why do organizations actually get stuck in the first place? How do you actually get buy-in from some of those key stakeholders who are potentially providing resistance to change or maybe have competing projects that they can't work on right now? Um, Joe, what does a well-run implementation actually look like?
Um, so for what I've said around the design and the agreement, and so everyone's clear on exactly what you're looking for, you've then got governance, project management, collaboration between the client and the supplier in terms of ownership for delivery, continuous reporting and communication plans, good training, upfront agreement on the overall communication plan. What a good implementation looks like is always, the whole roadshow communication, frequently asked questions, everything where we are doing that all before we, deploy the solution. But what a good implementation looks like is good governance, great teams, aligned collaborative teams, great communication plan with support from the supplier around, what that looks like in terms of boots on the ground or, delivery of videos and training, so that a thorough communication plan is key to successful implementation.
I think it's really interesting. Like we tend to think of implementation as like the technical side of things, setting up integrations and everything like that. But obviously, you've focused very heavily on communication and training.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
so
that's the
obviously
easy part, Ben. I think the integration of tech is the easy part. I think
Yeah.
it's the change management program and the comms piece, which is absolutely critical to a successful implementation, particularly if you're doing it in a short period of time.
Okay, great. So I think, Megan mentioned some of those key user groups earlier around, particularly around EAs who potentially are a little bit resistant to change, maybe operate with a way that have been operating to book and manage travel for a long period of time, maybe don't want to look at potentially new solution or a hybrid of the solution that they have right now. So um, what do you think works well there? Like we love being on site, and like sitting down and like working side by side with people, but there are any things that you seen work really well, in terms of working with users who are going to be like heavy users who maybe are reluctant to make a change to their existing solution?
Sure. So again, there's no such thing as over communicating, right? Change is coming. how do we get prepared? Work instructions for pulling all those loyalty numbers out of the old TMC, the office hours, and again that on-site support. We did that at great length when we rolled out Navan regionally, and we also did that in a phased approach because we didn't necessarily want to flip the switch on for all 50 countries at once, but to really kind of also help build that momentum. So when we looked at our implementation, we said, okay, well let's go forward with North America. Then the following month, Europe, then the following month with the rest of the areas. And then at the end of that following month, all of the partners that were needed, because then also helped build that positive momentum. So of course, all departments will start to talk. We got that real creative buzz going. And of course, then, like you mentioned, we did have a lot of that on-site support so that folks still had that face. They could walk in and say, help me set up my profile, help me load my loyalty. I'm working on this really complex multi-leg trip. Show me some tips and tricks that you have so that you have that face-to-face interaction to really help build and strengthen that relationship.
And with that phase rollout, did you find people were maybe saying, "Oh, I've just seen you using this in North America. Why can't we have it in Europe?" and things like that? Does it create some sort of excitement among the rest of the team to roll out, or do you think Big Bang can work as well?
I think Big Bang can work as well. We had a lot of change going on with some other
Okay.
areas, so of course we didn't also want to overwhelm the entire population. So it was again creating that positive buzz. Now the switch was flipped for everyone, so we did have some
Okay.
of those early adopters in some of those regions starting to learn, which then easily became our super users by the time we had boots on the ground in those locations.
So those super users kind of like head of the curve, they learnt the van and then they could support with the rollout in other regions as well.
And had some really great conversations and questions when the teams were on site. So they felt that they already had a face with the name, if you will.
Okay, great. Um, and Joe, I think, testing is obviously like a key area
Yep,
that people want to be sure of, right? So
yep.
we've looked at comms, we've looked at actually setting up the technical integrations, maybe looking at payments and policy. So how can people feel comfortable that they've done the right testing to make sure that everything's going to work as expected when they actually, to Megan's point, flick that switch on?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to hold the supplier or the consultant, whoever's leading the project, accountable for the testing. There has to be vigorous testing by market and certainly by partners that are used by TMCs as well. So, there has to be a full test plan in place that is, well, like I say, the client holds the supplier accountable to deliver that. And I think, as Meegan was saying about, phased approach versus a big bang approach. I think you can do either dependent on the intensity of the train and the testing and the training. So, the integration piece is the easy piece, like I said earlier. I think as long as you've got time to do the sufficient testing and training, you can do either a big bang or a phased approach, depending on how many resources you've got allocated to the project.
Yeah, so I guess it's really around tailoring that to what works for you as a business,
Right.
what resources you have available,
Yeah.
and maybe also, the maturity of the individual regions that you're working with, and one may be more receptive to a more technology-led solution or an offline solution, so you can
Right.
manage that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Um, I guess just looking forward, right? So maybe looking at advice to the audience for someone who's, right now trying to build the internal case for switching platforms. Megan, you've been through this, you've built that business case, you've presented it internally, you've found the person that's going to take this forward to the business. What are any tips or advice that you would have to someone who's looking to put together that business case for change?
Sure. So I would say, be clear on those current challenges. Don't wait for your perfect timing. But then also balancing that stakeholder input with that forward momentum. If questions are starting to come up, maybe, the proper approach is to go through some sort of stage gate review.
Mm.
We were really, don't necessarily say lucky, but I say feel honored and privileged that we were really able to stay to that original timeline. When you
Mm.
think about implementation of vast variety of projects and not just in travel and expense. But usually there's always one little challenge or one little hiccup that says, okay, well, now we need to maybe delay a few weeks or however. And since we were very methodical and thought out all of those things kind of in advance, planning it and putting those contingency plans into place, we were really able to stay to that timeline. So, there's never going to be a perfect timing for it, but just making sure that you're being as transparent, proactive, and straightforward with the various pockets of stakeholders that are going to be involved is really one of the things that's going to set everyone up for success.
Perfect. And when you look at like what, you're not just doing this with travel, you're doing it with other areas of the business as well. Like what typically forms part of a business case? We've thought about like cost as obviously being something user experience. Are there anything else that you need to make sure is included as part of that business case?
Well, it's also thinking about, there's hard costs and soft costs. So if
Right.
you're also thinking about where things are very process heavy,
Yeah.
or they're taking a lot of time for low value or low complexity, but it's taking a lot of time, how do you start to move that forward from a user focus, or to be able to strip out some of that um, non-value add that can
Mm,
have a lot of that automation. That was really what propelled us forward, because there was so many manual things that was really dragging everything down, that was becoming a disruption to the business.
okay.
Putting this solution into place allowed up a lot more free time for more value add items and value added tasks throughout just about everyone's day.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned around consolidating the current challenges that you have as a business. Now, travel tends to be a very emotive subject. And so naturally people are very willing to provide feedback. Did you find that you had to, you already had all those pain points, those problems, or is it something that you had to go out to the business and ask?
Sure. I would say through a lot of structured surveys, a lot of inputs,
Okay.
a lot of impromptu discussions, around the corner, getting a coffee. We did get that, but of course, no plan is going to be perfect, right? So that it was
Mm,
also building a little bit of that focus in, that if we did think of something or something did arise moving forward, that we also had a little bit of time and resources built into it so that we could properly address it and then move on.
perfect. And then Joe, from your side, like anything, any tips, any advice that you think would be beneficial for the team in terms of, what does good look like that
Business,
you've
yeah.
seen work really well?
Yeah, no, I mean, in terms of a business case, what everything, I agree with everything that Megan said, and but it's about the understanding the level of effort that is required internally, and really to map that out. What does good look like? A very a a plan that has the right level of engagement from the supplier and from the client, from a project management perspective, from a design, ensure that the design is absolutely covers every aspect, and to the point earlier about the gaps, look and see what isn't working well, map that design out, and then, build, test, train and deploy
Yeah.
with the right resources, flagging at any point where you might have a go or no go situation, and to plan around that. So just to be completely transparent about where you are in the implementation.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Like there's going to be things that go wrong, right? There are going to
Right.
be things that don't work exactly as you expect. So it's about, making sure there's clarity from the travel management company side, from your side, from the
Yeah.
customer side as early as possible so that it can be resolved.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And one really interesting thing you mentioned earlier was around the actual technical implementation side actually
Yeah.
not taking up a huge amount of time. Like, why do you think why do you think that is? Like, is that just people have a perception that the actual technical integration is going to be a long time,
Oh,
or do you
yeah.
think like the actual process has evolved and actually what you need to be able to implement a TMC isn't that technical anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly with Navan, you have a global instance. We don't have any more, an instance by country. It's set at a global level. It's a much easier configuration to implement. And I think it's probably more the offline servicing that takes up the time rather than the technical configuration of a solution such as yours.
Yeah, and offline servicing obviously like a really key component for people right now. So, what have you seen people get wrong with like offline servicing in terms of like the implementation? Is it like simple stuff like not having phone numbers, email set up, or it was more around knowing the customer and really
Yeah, it's
understanding
knowledge
like what they're
transfer. It's knowledge. It's a knowledge. It's awareness of the client. Really, it's
yeah,
an understanding of how you're going to service the client, depending on how long a client has been with their incumbent. That change is significant in terms of upskilling an offline team to support.
yeah. Okay, perfect. Um, Megan, maybe one view for here is kind of connected. Like, what are your lessons learned from implementing Navan? Any like key themes that you take away from this, or maybe anything that you might have done differently as well.
Sure. So I would definitely have an internal project manager. Like I said, it
Okay.
was a very small team. And again, we don't have a global travel manager here. So
Yeah,
there was a lot of hats for all of us to wear at one time. Someone internally on the customer side would definitely, I feel, be beneficial.
perfect. So I think actually that's a really good point. Is it's not necessarily someone that's going to actually run the implementation on your side, but it's like a single point of contact who can provide a TMC access to all the right people for that implementation. Who is the IT resource? Who's the finance person or the HR manager who's going to actually upload the policies into the platform or whoever owns that. So that single point of contact can actually manage everything internally from your perspective rather than having to reach out to multiple people all the time.
Mhm. Absolutely. So, of course, in my case, I did get that experience. So it's always great to be able to go through it. Would I
Mm.
ever do it again? I mean, maybe not. Definitely a good learning experience, though.
And interestingly, do you have like internal project managers at the business who do this kind of things, or do you outsource to like third parties for this type of work, like internal project management?
It's actually a blend.
Okay.
Really dependent upon the project itself.
Yeah. Okay. And I think another good question here is like, what was the timeline from decision to implementation for your team?
Sure. So we kicked off implementation the first business Monday of January. And then, like I said, we put all of the lights on, but really made it usable to North America in the beginning of April. We moved that timeline backwards, knowing of when we needed to evaluate, when we needed to make a decision as the business, the contracting, the negotiating, ink to paper, and then of course kicking off. So true implementation for us started that first part of 2024 and then go live April 4th.
Perfect. And Joe, on your side,
Yeah,
maybe not obviously the start of the decision making process all the way
yeah,
through to
yeah.
implementation, but like what does a typical time frame look like you for an TMC implementation and rollout?
Well, I mean that can depend on the TMC, but typically an implementation can be between three to 6 to 12 months.
Okay.
The latest one we did in Navan with around 87 countries was 4 months. But like I
Okay.
say, that was from kickstart to go live. That was not the
Yeah.
contracting piece that Megan was talking about. So that was just pure, design, build, test, implementation, and train and deploy.
Yeah. So 87 markets,
87
4 months
markets in four
finished.
months. Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. And do you think was that something that you obviously scoped in a lot of detail before starting that implementation as well?
It
Like
was
was
scoped, yeah, there was a lot of detail around the scope between
okay.
the client and Navan
Yeah.
before we started the project. We were brought in to purely, excuse me, purely execute the project. So there had been a lot of work done around that statement of requirements. There's a lot of detail in there. So they'd done a lot of the design already. So when we came in, it was just replaying the design to us as experts with Navan and the client just to make sure everything had been covered. But what was involved in that project was also 9 partners. So there was
Okay.
Navan globally, and then there were 9 partners involved in that. So I think my lessons learned around that, don't ever underestimate the complexity of partners.
Yeah.
And the testing for partners as well is it needs to be as thorough as it is for a Navan or another TMC.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's like the Navan rollout, you have some partners and there's some additional
Yeah.
work required for those as well and testing as well on those
Yeah,
ones.
they have to just be included in the same test plans and scenarios that everybody else is. So yeah.
Perfect. I think, one other really good question that we have here was around like continued momentum. So obviously there's a rollout, there's a launch, people are on site, there's Navan socks, there's cakes, there's whatever it is, right? And people are kind of excited about a new solution. But like after that initial hype has died down, is there anything that you focused on to make sure that there's continued momentum with the rollout and adoption of a new tool? So Megan, maybe, from your perspective, like anything in particular that you noticed there?
So, along with all the things that we both mentioned throughout the call today, was also continuing to have those open office hour sessions
Okay.
following that, so that then they had an opportunity to check back in and say, "I've been working on this. This is working out really great," or "We went through this scenario and I didn't quite catch it in my notes. Let's go through it again." It was also an opportunity for somebody that maybe went live at the very beginning, then they didn't do any travel. Then it's later on in the summer and they said, "Oh, well, now I have to travel and now I forgot everything that I learned at the beginning of April." So it was also an opportunity to do that. We also occasionally host our travel days webcast.
Yeah.
We'll have Navan be one of the leaders in that space, but then we'll have different individuals such as our duty of care provider to come in. So it's always a refresher. We continue to have tips and tricks along the way. The platform continually evolves. So how someone looked at it even 6 months ago looks a little bit different than it does today. I know we all get kind of bogged down in, well, it looks a little bit different, so I must have to do something different now. And that's usually not the case. But again, there's plenty of information out there, but then we also try to still make it a high touch interaction when they do have questions that come up.
Yeah, I love that, like those ongoing travel days. And I guess that works with other solutions as well. Like it's not just travel, you might have that for other suppliers across the business. It's around like creating continued engagement and updates around like key software or providers that you're using in the business.
Absolutely. We do that with several other of our platforms and projects that we have. So again, everything's going to continue to evolve. Everything's going to continue to advance. So it's always good to be able to hear it in a consolidated form rather than
Yeah.
just kind of stumbling upon it.
And Joe, we've covered a lot there, both in the session and Megan's just mentioned, but anything else that you wanted to add there in terms of ensuring like continued adoption after that initial launch phase?
Yeah, no, I've just said, don't ever let the technology go stale. We are very much about optimization,
Yeah.
keep it live, go in and do audit checks, spot checks, as well as all of the communication on the office hours, and the the surgeries as people call them. But yeah, absolutely. Just keep that tech live, keep it optimized, never let it go stale, and just keep in it and testing and occasionally go in and have a look and make sure that your top route is still performing as it should be, because things do drop out of tech and you've just got to keep sure and make sure they're optimized.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. We have a couple of questions here around like the like size and scale. So Megan, I don't know if you can mention it, but like number of countries that you operate in, a number of employees for Wabtec. Are you okay to share that?
We're 50 countries wide, 30,000 strong.
Okay, and then Joe, you mentioned you don't have to share
Yeah.
the name, but you recently did an implementation for a customer. Do you
Yeah.
have any context there? So you said
Yeah,
87
just
markets.
87 countries globally, 35,000 employees.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, these are the kind of like a scale of customers that are being worked with right now, which is great. Another question here, Megan, for you. So the decision to change TMC for Megan was October, and then you went live in April. Is that correct?
It is. So
Okay.
while we, still had ink to paper in October, you're not going to get any buy-in. You're not going to get any attention going into those holidays. So we definitely wanted to wait until after the first of the year with fresh minds and hopefully fresh schedules to be able to make sure that things were streamlined.
Okay, perfect. Um, and then a good question here, right? So feedback after launch, positive and negative, I guess. Like, so is there any, key themes that you could pick out of those two, Megan, in terms of the van rollout?
Sure. And of course, with any implementation and change management, you'll please some of the people some of the time, but not all of the people all of the time. So when you think about anything that, folks would say is, maybe in the way that you book travel, but again, that's going to be a little bit different. So
Mhm.
some platforms might have all in one shot. Obviously, this is focused on more of, well, I know where I'm going, so let me do my flight, but
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure where I'm going to stay. So maybe I need to do that hotel booking a little bit later. one of the biggest pieces of feedback that we initially got was, why didn't we do this sooner?
Okay. I like that feedback. It's a good
Yeah.
one. Yeah, I think it's very fair. Like, people want to operate or manage their bookings in different ways. So, if there are people where the solution doesn't work exactly in the same way they think, it's about making sure that you communicate with them and really double down on the training and things like that.
Mm.
Um, Okay, great. Let me just review this. I think that there's a few questions in here, like, are very specific to individual companies around like policy configuration and setup. So, one here, can you speak to Navan's functionality around compliance and policy? So, very high level here, Greg, like we have the ability to customize policies and configurations as you want, but we'd really need to understand the individual needs of specific customers' setups, and then we can map out exactly what that looked like for you. So I know it's not a direct answer to your question, but it's a little bit of a difficult one to answer without having a little bit more context about exactly what you'd require. But we're very happy to scope in a little bit more detail if you wanted to discuss further. So I think that we're kind of reaching the end of our 45 minutes here. So I think, a couple of key themes that, from my perspective, I found like really interesting. The first is around like the case for change, right? So identifying like the right person internally at the business who can sponsor this, then mapping out all of the key individual stakeholders who are going to be involved, not just in the implementation, but the actual further rollout, understanding what they need, understanding how a potential new solution actually solves for some of those challenges for those users, and then building a business case. And then to Joe's point, like in order to make sure that you have like a really streamlined implementation process that actually doesn't take a lot of resources, there is some initial work required on the scoping side to make sure that like you have a really comprehensive statement of work that you can stick to and use as a guide throughout that implementation process. So I'm sure there's many more things that people will take from this, but like those are some of the key ones that I've had from here. So like I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Joe and Meegan for joining for this webinar. So next steps, the on-demand recording will be shared and available shortly after this session. If anything from today's conversation sparks some questions about, what a move to Navan could look like for you, for your organization, we're very happy to continue that discussion. So there's a couple of links in the chat, so you can request a demo link. There's actually a case study with Opteva as well, which I think Joe's contributed to. So it's really worth a read about like what an actual implementation at Navan looks like. But yeah, thank you so much for everyone joining today. Thank you to Joe. Thank you to Meegan for all the insight into what your experience of an implementation all the way through the selection, implementation, rollout, and ongoing looks like. So thanks everyone. And we look forward to our next webinar that's coming up in a few weeks' time.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.